My name is Bill Buchanan, and I host a podcast series in the world leaders in cryptography. And I'm so happy to host a true world leader with me today, Tal Rabin. Hi, Tal.
Hi, Bill. It's happy to be here.
Yeah. And where are you in the world just now?
I'm in New York, in Manhattan, the Upper West Side, in my home.
That's great. So Tal is a professor of computer and information science at the University of Pennsylvania and a manager at AWS. Previously, she was the head of research at the Algorand Foundation and head of cryptography research at IBM's Thomas J. Watson Research Center. In 2014, she was defined as one of the 22 most powerful women engineers by Business Insider and a woman of vision for innovation by the Anita Borg Institute. In 2018, she was defined by Forbes as one of the world's top 50 women in tech. And in 2019, she was awarded the RSA Award for Excellence in Mathematics. In 2023, she was awarded the Dijkstra Prize for her work on secure multiparty computation. Tal works in the areas of secure multiparty computation, threshold cryptography, blockchain systems, and proactive security. That's a whole lot of work. So, what's your current role and what does a typical day involve for you?
So currently, I'm on leave from UPenn and, in fact, full-time at AWS, at Amazon Web Services. I came with a group of people that we traveled together from IBM Research through Algorand Foundation and now to AWS. And our goal is to introduce advanced cryptographic techniques such as multiparty computation, threshold cryptography, fully homomorphic encryption, the things that we've been doing research on for the past 20, 25 years, and to bring these advanced new techniques into the infrastructure of AWS and also as solutions for AWS customers. And a typical day looks like the following. We try to talk to groups within Amazon that work with customers to try and identify places where we can introduce these techniques and try to see if we have a path together to add these things.
That's great. And so, what were your school days like? Were you an amazing pupil? What were your favorite subjects?
Well, it's a question of how far into my school days you want to go. But when I was in elementary school or in high school, my mother always used to say that she didn't know that schools gave homework until my sister got to school and she saw that she was doing homework. So apparently I was not doing homework. But I always loved math. That was from the beginning. I always did math homework as well. And then I got to the university. I think that for me, it was a course of becoming more and more serious in my studying and also in my attitude towards the work and so on. So when I was an undergrad, I was already better than I was in high school in how I approached studying. And this continued through my master's and my PhD.
Yeah. And so what sparked your interest in cryptography specifically?
Sometimes you just need luck in life. So I graduated in 1986, and I think that this was the only year that there was a slump in the tech in Israel, and there were no jobs. So I said, okay, I'll stay on for a master's. 2 more years, and I'll then things will have improved in Israel, and I'll go and get a job. And I had to choose an advisor. In Israel, the master's program is not like the master programs here now in the US, that it's just more studying. It's a program that you have to submit an original thesis. And then I looked around and I saw Michael Ben-Or. He seemed to me like he was working on interesting things. Not that I even knew exactly what he was working on. And then he gave me this problem, which was a cryptographic problem. And that sort of set me on my path for doing cryptography. And during my master's, I worked on this problem. And when I solved it and so on, it was clear for me that I was going to continue on to a PhD and to a research career. I mean, there was a switch there during the master's that changed my focus on what I wanted to do. But the cryptography was just what he had given me. And of course, over the years, cryptography gained in importance and its impact on the world that we live in. When I started, there wasn't what was then known as the World Wide Web. That didn't even exist. I think that the first browser I saw in, I don't know when, but definitely not in 1983 when I started studying.
Yeah. So what was the first research paper that you picked up that you can remember really sparking? There was the famous papers in 1976, the Diffie-Hellman paper, the RSA paper, or the Shamir's paper on shares. And so what was the paper that you can remember vividly as picking up and saying, this is what I'd like to do as in the future?
So, as I said, it wasn't so much my direction. This is what I want to do. But Michael gave me this problem to work on, which turned into my master's. And in fact, you had mentioned the Dijkstra Award. The Dijkstra Award was awarded for this paper, plus two other papers. In telling me to work on this paper, on this problem, Michael had given me his paper with Goldwasser and
Mhm.
Wigderson. And in that paper, it also refers to Shamir's secret sharing paper. So those were the two papers that I read in order to get me going on the problem to understand and so on. And both these problems are masterpieces. I mean,
Yeah.
truly inspiring things in their beauty and their simplicity and their reliance on math. So I read those two. There weren't that many papers in the area of multi-party computation at the time. There was one more paper. It wasn't, this was sort of the birth of that area. But those two papers, to this day, I think are two of the most amazing works that there are.
Yeah. And you moved from Israel to the US. What was your first steps into the US?
Yes, so I finished my PhD and I wanted to come and be faculty back in Israel, but we were always told in order to be faculty in Israel, you have to do a postdoc in the US.
Yes.
So I got a postdoc at MIT. The only issue was that I wasn't really listening to my husband at the time. And he was telling me that we're not going back to Israel after the postdoc due to political reasons. He didn't want to be in Israel. But when I finished my postdoc, or before I was finishing it, and I needed to apply to jobs, he had made it clear that we're not going back to Israel, and he would follow me anywhere in the US that I would want to go, but not to Israel.
Yeah. And you must have met some amazing people when you went to the US. Can you remember some of the people that you managed to interface with?
Uh, of course, I had met those people before because
Mm.
going to conferences and so on. So Silvio Micali was my host at MIT. And of course, later our paths joined again around Algorand Foundation when he had asked me to come and open the foundation. And of course, other people who were there were Shafi Goldwasser, who I'd also met earlier, Ron Rivest. But more than the people that I had met prior, I had met my peers really there at MIT, which are the people that I had worked with for a long, long time after that at IBM. which were Shaya Levy and Rosario Gennaro, and also Juan Canetti was there. And a year or two later, we, in fact, the four of us, were at IBM Research and started that group that you mentioned. And we had a wonderful time at IBM working together. We collaborated. So MIT really sort of set me on this future of the best people that I love to work with.
And East Coast was better than West. Why not? Why not Stanford? Why stay in
I
around
think
New
that
York?
it was, sorry, I don't know. I knew Silvio and he accepted me for the postdoc. And I don't know if I had given so much thought to anything specific. However, when I finished the postdoc, I understood that I wasn't going back to Israel immediately, but maybe I was still not listening. And I thought that maybe in a year or two or three, we would go back to Israel. So I didn't choose an academic job. I wanted a research job. And really, then IBM Research was a wonderful place to go. In fact, it started its decline then. But at the time that I applied, it still was a wonderful, wonderful place to be.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what would you say is your favorite area of cryptography? You've worked on many different aspects of it, the multi-party computation, the secret shares, and so on. What's the one thing that you really love?
It is the area of multi-party computation. It's not
Mm.
something specific in it, but it's this idea that parties collaborate to solve a problem and can achieve things that we can't do otherwise. It gives you something that you cannot do unless you have cryptography. And I love those things that cryptography is an enabler.
And so, what problems are you working on at the current time? Obviously, there are lots of secrets involved in the work that you do for AWS, but is there anything publicly that you can reveal that is your current focus?
I can speak in general terms, and then it wouldn't be something specific related to a product. But for example, threshold cryptography is something that enables to provide more security to keys, to signing keys. And as you can imagine, in AWS, there are quite a few keys. So we are looking into seeing if we can take these techniques of threshold crypto, which enable you to do computations with keys that are in distributed form, and introduce it into AWS. We found all kinds of places, but getting things integrated is a different story, as I've learned since I've arrived at AWS.
Yeah. And obviously, one way that you can do this is to store your keys, your private keys, in a secure enclave. But obviously, we have the problem. What happens if the secure enclave is destroyed or you lose access to the cloud? Are you also looking at ways of sharding keys so that you can actually
Eh,
recover them?
This is what threshold cryptography enables you to do. What it does is it takes the secret key and it splits it, exactly as you said, you call it shards, I call it shares. It takes it and say splits it into three parts and any two can sign. And you put the pieces, you can still put them in some secure hardware. These are orthogonal things, and in fact, enhance the security of the system further. And what you provide, in addition to the fact that you split up the key, you don't want to reconstruct it for signing, you also give the functionality that enables to take the shares of the pieces, with each share do some local computation, and then combine it together without combining the key, but producing the signature.
Yeah. Because obviously the weakness of the method of sharding the keys is the dealer. So if the dealer goes bad, then they could keep a copy, secret copy of the private key, just like when you're playing poker. If the dealer takes a copy of all the cards, then they know the hands. So I know that there are verifiable secret share methods that can be used now for distributed key generation. Do you think they've got some opportunity to be used in modern systems?
I think we always have to think about the application and the trust model because the question is, who do you trust and when do you trust them? So, for example, this is not something that AWS actually does at this time, but let's say that AWS is the entity generating the key. If we trust AWS, then we can create the key in a secure environment. There is no need to apply a complex key distribution generation protocol. But in the cases where that is not possible, when you cannot generate it someplace secure, then we do need to do the protocols that you alluded to. And these are protocols that we designed. The first one, now I don't remember, I think it was the end of the 90s, maybe close to 2000. And it's exactly what you said. There is no single entity that knows the key ever.
So your father also won the Dijkstra Prize in 2015, and where you're the only parent-child pair to have received the award. What's the link with Michael Ben Orr?
Okay. So
Is that
interestingly enough, both my father and I won the Dijkstra Award with the same person, who was my advisor, Michael Ben-Or. My father and Michael wrote two separate papers, and they were awarded together. I wrote the paper with Michael for which we won. And by the way, this connection makes my biological father my academic grandfather because my father is the advisor of Michael Ben-Or, and Michael Ben-Or is my advisor. So we have a little bit of family confusion there.
That's great, yeah. And so what was it like working at the Thomas J. Watson Research Centre, and why did you decide to move on?
It was amazing working there. I had said that IBM research was at a decline at the time that I was there, which is true, but the team that I was on was unbelievable. We all got there together, and there was a previous team of people that included Hugo Kravchik, Mihir Belare, and others, great cryptographers, but they all left when we arrived. And then we were these four young researchers, all out of PhD or a postdoc, really at the beginning of our careers. And we were put there together, and we sort of had to chart our path. And we did it as a group, and it was really wonderful. And we stayed together for a long time. In fact, I'm still with one of these people also at AWS, with Shaya Levy, and Hugo Kravchik, who had hired us to IBM and left, came back. So I think that for me, IBM Research was an amazing place because of the group and and the place. They really enabled us to do the research. They didn't stand in our way, which sometimes is a lot for an employer to do, really giving you the opportunity to do what you want, despite the difficult times that IBM Research was in. So it was really amazing working there. Was there
Yeah.
another part to that question?
And why did you decide
Oh,
to
why did
leave?
I leave? I left because I was there for 23 years. It's not like I
Wow.
left. I was there 5 years and I left. But at some point, I felt that I wanted to try something else, to work in another place. And now I'm like a millennial, a new job every 2 years. So I was at Algorand Foundation for 2. Then I went to UPenn for 3. And now I'm at Amazon, soon to be 2. We'll see where it goes. So I wanted a variety just to see what something else was like. Not because the place had failed me or anything. I could have stayed.
No, IBM are an amazing company when you think they're over 100 years old. and they're still one of the top companies in the world. They've had a difficult time. The
Yes.
AI didn't quite take off as they thought it would, but certainly in terms of cryptography and cybersecurity, they are still seen as a world leader. So they've done very well to survive.
Yes, yes.
So can you,
And their current CEO, where we were sibling managers at some point in the past,
wow,
at the beginning, some 30 years ago. Arvind Krishna is doing an amazing job.
mm,
It really, even then, when I met him, he looked like he was going to be the CEO.
yeah,
And I guess he just was suited for it and is bringing the
yeah,
company to a wonderful place.
yeah. It's unusual for someone to be promoted up from a research lab to a CEO
Yes,
level. Normally, they would bring the CEO in. So he must have really showed he had good business
yes.
sense overall. So, can you outline how multi-party computation works and why it enhances security?
Okay. So first, we can give an example of what is a problem that you want to solve with multi-party computation. So this area was introduced by Andy Yao in 1982 with the millionaires problem.
Mhm.
And what was the question that the millionaires wanted to solve? I'm changing it a little. They wanted to know the sum of all their salaries. Of course, there's a trivial solution. Every millionaire, I'm sure today it would be billionaires, every millionaire can say how much they have. I have 1.2 million, he has 1.3 million, and we sum it up. But we add a requirement to the goals of the problem, which is what makes it interesting. And the requirement is that the inputs of the parties remain private, that you don't learn anything beyond the sum. You don't learn any salary of any party that participates in the computation. So the question was how to do it. Andy Yao gave a solution to the problem in the computational setting. What do I mean in the computational setting? That we have some assumptions on which we design cryptographic systems. For example, that factoring is hard. That's an assumption. And he gave a solution under such an assumption. And then there was the question whether you can do it without assumptions, which, by the way, in this time when we think that quantum computers may exist and factoring will be broken, to have solutions that are information theoretically secure is important. So the question is, and the reason I'm mentioning the information theoretic protocols is because it's easier to explain how the solution works. So let's say we're three parties and and we each have an input and we want to compute the sum of these values. So each one of us will take our input. Let's say my input is 11, and I break it up into 2, 5, and 4. These are random numbers. Their property is that they sum up to 11. But by watching any single number, in fact, even by watching two numbers, okay, let's remove this whole part. I'm going to give a simpler explanation, okay? Okay.
Okay.
So the reason that I'm mentioning the information theoretic setting is because it's easier to give an explanation of how you would compute such a function. But we have solutions that are both under computational assumption and in the information theoretic setting. And I want to say that information theoretic solutions also have the advantage that in this day and age, when we're talking about quantum computers, that may break factoring, then to give solutions that do not have such assumptions is also an advantage. So how would we compute a sum of all the inputs? Let's say that there are 5 parties. This is not how the protocols work, but it gives you a flavor of what we can do. Each party has its input, x1 up to x5, and let's say I'm the first party. I choose a random number, r, and I compute x1 plus r. This number reveals nothing about x1 because there's some random number added into it. You don't know what it is. I take x1 plus r and I pass it to the second party. The second party will take x1 plus r and do plus x2. This value doesn't expose anything about x1 plus x2 or about x1 and x2. So when it's passed to the third party, it reveals nothing. x3, x4, and x5 all do the same thing. They add their xi in, and at the end, the last party, the fifth party, has x1 plus x2 plus x3 plus x4 plus x5 plus r. Okay? That is not the sum, and we want the sum. The last party returns this sum to me. And what I do is I remove r. I minus the r out, and I broadcast what is x1 plus 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 x5. And now we've managed to compute the sum without learning anything. So you already can get a sense of how magical things can happen, things that you think you can't do. A priori, it seems amazing. How can we learn the sum of all parties without revealing the input? So here I gave you a way. In the information theoretic setting, what we do is we provide a way to do addition and a way to do multiplication. And with those, we can compute any function.
It's amazing, yeah. And I suppose it's a little bit like the Peterson commitment. So I know on privacy-aware cryptocurrency, you can actually have this blinding factor. So it's possible to find out that you have enough Bitcoin to pay for a certain transaction, and you don't need to know what that blinding factor is. So I suppose it's all about being able to still compute, but be able to have this secret there that doesn't reveal anything about what it is you're actually computing.
Yes. That is the
So
whole idea, that you can
yeah,
compute while preserving privacy. And we
yeah,
have theorems, both in the computational setting and in the information theoretic setting, that tell us we can compute any function.
yeah. And 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 or plus and multiplication are just like an electronic circuit. Everything can be broken down into these or and logic gates, I would assume. Yeah, the complicated scrambled circuits is one that I've never quite understood. I think it's based on some of the methodology that you defined by Yao's work, but that can be quite complex.
Yao is, in fact, the person who introduced garbled
Yeah,
circuits. His
yeah,
original paper gives a solution with a garbled circuit.
yeah.
Exactly.
There's also a joke about uh, the the socialist millionaires problem, where you've got to find out if someone has the same amount as
Mhm.
someone else. So can you quickly outline how threshold cryptography works and what its core applications are?
So the idea is that the threshold crypto comes to solve the following problem. We have in the signing key, or even in encryption, but I'll talk now about signing all the time when I say signing, but it applies to encryption, decryption as well. We have a very important and valuable key, K. And we don't want to store the key K in a single location because it's a single point of failure. If somebody breaks into the server where K is held, then they can do the signing, they can do whatever they want. They own the key. So we want to enhance the security of the system. And the way that we do it is by taking the key K and splitting it up. Let's say that the key is 11. I can split the key up into 3 pieces, 2, 13, and 0. These are 3 shares that sum up to 11. These are random numbers. If you see any 2 of them, you learn nothing about the key. So if I would put these shares of the key in 3 different servers, you really would need to break into 3 of them in order to learn the key K. There is something that needs to be said, that the systems can't be the same and so on, that you can't utilize a bug that you found in one system if all are the same, but I'm ignoring this point for now. So in addition to having this distribution of the key, we have to enable the system to sign. So we also, I'd said this before, we provide an algorithm that from each share can do some local computation and then put the keys together, sorry, not the keys, to put the pieces of the signature together to create a full signature. And as I said, I'll just emphasize it, the threshold crypto really enhances the security of a system.
Yeah. And you were awarded the Dijkstra Prize for verifiable secret sharing and multi-party protocols with an honest majority. Can you outline the key contributions of that work?
So the problem which Michael gave me, there was an original paper by Benoit Goldwasser and Vigdorson, which I mentioned, which is one of the papers that I read. When we discuss multi-party computations, we have to say how many parties we have, usually n, but we also say how many of the parties can be faulty. Can we still protect the computation and the security of the system in face of malicious behavior? And the Benoit Goldwasser paper said that they can tolerate a third of the parties being faulty. And the question was, can we go higher? Can we provide a solution also if up to half of the parties are faulty? And that is the gap that was closed by my paper with Benoit, in this paper that you mentioned. We went from a third to a half, and a half is optimal. You can't do more. And you really want systems to be as optimal as possible, because if you say only a third can be faulty, that's a stronger requirement than saying, okay, I can tolerate up to half being faulty. So it's important to reduce, really increase the number of faults that we can tolerate.
Great. And how does secure aggregation work for privacy-aware federated learning?
This is a line of work which is now becoming very active because people want to do machine learning when the input from the parties needs to be kept private, which when you hear what I'm saying, you say, this is exactly multi-party computation. You want to compute some function while preserving the input of the parties. Because not in all cases, the learning model owns all the data. So you do want to do something when you're doing learning where inputs are separated. And as we said, we have the theorem that we can compute anything. But the reason that it's an active area of research now is because the theoretical solutions that say we can compute anything are there, but in many cases, they're not efficient. So we need to design specific protocols for specific problems and to improve the performance. And that is why we have this area of doing multi-party computations for aggregated learning. And it uses various techniques, some of the original things, but also additional ideas.
Because obviously, federated learning, you might have three hospitals who want to share data, but the data needs to stay locally. And if we need to train a model, we need to take the data from each one. Surely homomorphic encryption would be the holy grail with that. So, do you actually see that we could move from federated learning towards privacy-aware machine learning with homomorphic encryption?
So homomorphic encryption, again, is a technique that is wonderful and beautiful and genius in theory, but in practice, when you're computing with a fully homomorphic framework, computations can take 1,000 times more computation than the computation in the clear. In many instances, that renders this irrelevant. And also, so that's why you wouldn't use these techniques. And also, one thing that many times is disregarded in discussions about fully homomorphic encryption is the key management. Who in your scenario with the three hospitals owns the key that you're encrypting under? It can't be a single entity because then you violate the privacy. So in fact, you need to also do threshold cryptography in order to store the key in a way that no one knows what the key is. So fully homomorphic is wonderful. And if you find for a specific problem a really efficient design, then you can use it. But you also have to consider that you are still going to need to do threshold techniques for key management.
Yeah. And I think in 2020, you posed a question of can a blockchain keep a secret? What was the answer and why?
So blockchains, despite the fact that people think they're anonymous, they are not anonymous, they're pseudonymous. So in fact, and if you put things in the transactions that you write, everyone can see it anyways. So the question was, can we take parties that are doing a consensus, which is part of the dynamic of the blockchain, specifically in the Algorand design, and let them somehow hold a secret which propagates through the life of the blockchain using techniques of secret sharing and breaking things into shares? And the answer was yes, which we wouldn't have written the paper if it was no, which enables us, despite the fact that everything is visible on the blockchain, to somehow keep the secret and keep it going throughout the process of the lifetime of the blockchain.
And so, how does cryptography for me too work?
So what was seen in, or is seen with the issues of complaining is that many people are afraid to be the first person to raise a red flag against someone. You fear for your career, for retribution, for many things. So what's clear is that if you know that you have another person, another two people who are complaining about the same person, you would want to join forces and complain. So the question is, how do you find these other people without exposing yourself? So here again, it sounds like multi-party computation, right? There is a set of inputs that you want to have remain private until there is, let's say, a subset of three people who have the same input. So this is what the hashtag cryptography for hashtag #MeToo comes to solve. It's a system that has some three trusted party, but that no individual party knows the inputs of the party submitting the complaints. And the minute that there are three parties who want to complain against the same person, they are notified that there are other people and whether they want to join forces and submit a complaint.
And what's a chameleon signature?
The chameleon signatures, by the way, had a very rough path to existence. We submitted this paper many, many times and was rejected and rejected and rejected. But it is one of my most cited papers today. I haven't looked recently. I don't know how many times or where it is on the list, but it did turn out. We always thought that it was a good paradigm, but it did turn out that people eventually did agree on this thing as well. So the idea with chameleon signatures is that you want to give a signature to another party. I want to tell you, Bill, I will give you $100. But I don't want you to be able to show to someone else that I gave you a contract that says, I will give you $100. But I want you to be confident that if we go to a court, the court will be able to see that I signed the document. So that is sort of the chameleon nature. You see it, the court can see it, but you can't show it to anybody else. And we give a solution to this problem. We give a solution to this problem, and the solution is also very, very nice and efficient. So I think this is also part of why it got a lot of traction after it was published. But not being used. Though I think maybe in the future it'll have some usage, but currently it's not being used.
Yeah, I think the chameleon hash methods are used in some places, so they obviously have great advantages. So do you think
Yes.
it's possible to create a method which does encryption and signatures at the same time?
Definitely. I mean, we do have these designs. We have to remember that we work in two worlds. We work in a world of symmetric crypto and in a world of public key crypto. The reason that we would want to have such a primitive is to save on computation, on space, and so on. Because, of course, you can do a signature and then encryption together. You encrypt and then you sign. So the question is, can you do it more efficiently, both in the symmetric setting and in the public key setting? And in fact, in both these settings, we have techniques that enable this. I did not work on the symmetric solutions, but in the public key setting, there's work that I did with An and Dodis, and it enables you to do things efficiently and have the dual functionality.
And why did you pick to work in both academia and industry? Why not just select one over the other?
Well, I think that mostly I selected to work in industry. I was at IBM for 23 years. I did choose to go to UPenn quite late. It was my dream. When I thought that I was going to go back to Israel, I was going to apply to one of the universities in Israel. There was no question in my mind that it would be academia. Also, because in Israel, there wasn't any research lab that was active the way that IBM research was. But when I thought that I wasn't going back, but thought that I would go back shortly, I didn't want to apply to academia and be under the tenure pressure and so on. So I went to IBM Research. And I loved it so much that I didn't leave for a long time, 23 years. But then when I was thinking, where do I go to? I did think of my original plan and what I thought I wanted to do. And it was natural to try and apply to the university. But sometimes old dreams don't fit reality in the present. And we'll see what happens with UPenn,
Yeah.
because now
And
I'm
obviously,
very happy at AWS.
yeah. And obviously in the past, there's been lots of problems with patenting the RSA method, Diffie-Hellman method, the Schnorr patent held back a lot of the signature work. What's your opinions on patenting cryptographic methods? Are they a good thing or not?
I think that patents in many times are um, inhibitors for advancement in cryptography. For example, you mentioned the signing and encrypting. So the symmetric techniques had, some of them had patents on them,
Yeah,
and
percent.
they were not, as a result, were not adopted by the standards bodies,
Mhm.
which was a pity, because
Yeah,
otherwise they'd be widely used. In this way, they were not.
yeah,
So, but on the other hand, companies want these patents as defensive patents and things like that. I don't get into the business of what the companies want and need, but it sometimes can be a problem when crypto is patented. But what I want to say, patented or not, what's very important is that crypto be public, that we know the constructions and are able to attack them and never rely on security by obscurity. It's very important that we know what we have and what we're working with.
okay, yeah. So what do you think the next decade in cryptography looks like?
So first of all, of course, we are moving forward with post-quantum crypto. This is part of it's already happening now, but it was is going to proceed into the future of getting it deployed. But this is not research, this is more a deployment thing. But on the other hand, there are also interesting question related to systems that are post-quantum. What can we do? How can we do different things with them and so on? So I think that's going to be part of the next 10 years, but also in relation to quantum computers and the post-quantum crypto systems that we have. These systems are based on various lattice systems. Most of them, there are some Eclipse assumptions and so on. But we really need to work hard to see whether we can debunk these assumptions. Factoring has been around for so long that we have faith in it because nobody's managed to break it. But these lattice assumptions are newer, and we do need to get more faith in them. And also, we have to think, if these are broken, what are our alternatives? So maybe there has to be a forward looking into new assumptions and to see what we can do with those.
Yeah, good. And so what do you think are the key problems that we need to solve in the next decade or so?
Well, the things that I just mentioned, we have to be looking at those things. Of course, always I'd be happy to know about factoring, but that is challenging. And I do think that because of privacy regulations, we really need to look into these techniques of fully homomorphic encryption, multi-party computations, and so on, to see what we can provide that will enable us, in the face of privacy requirements, legislation, and so on, to do that we want to do. Because if, for example, what you said about the hospitals, if the hospitals won't be able to collaborate and share data, we really are going to be missing out on critical advancement in medication that can be designed and so on. So we really need to be able to share data in a more private way.
Yeah. And if you were to give advice to technological innovators for the future, what advice would you give them in the areas that they should target?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, so we
All
can
right,
skip
okay.
it.
So if you could change one thing about your career, what would it have been?
So you had sent me the questions, and my daughter was looking over them, and she said to me, "So, Ima, that's a really interesting question. What's your answer?" I think that partially it's a personality issue, and I wouldn't change anything. I love everything. But with my daughter yesterday, we went over my career, and she said, doing a PhD. No, of course I would do a PhD. Coming to the US for a postdoc. No, of course I would do that. Going to IBM, which wasn't my first choice because I wanted to go to Israel. Of course, I would do that. And then leaving it after 23 years to all the places, to Algorand Foundation, to UPenn, and now to everything I would do. But I do think that it really is partially the way that I am, that I'm sort of happy and accepting of whatever has passed.
Yeah, that's great. And if you were a new researcher doing a new PhD, what problem would you want to work on
In cryptography or in general?
in any area at all?
So of course, machine learning is hot, and there are a lot of exciting things going on there. One question, which I don't know is if it's a research question or not, but if we would know now, it would be interesting of whether machine learning techniques are just going to continue going up, or are they going to plateau at some point? If there was a way to say something, I think that would be fascinating, but I think that that's an extremely hard question. And maybe we just need the passage of time to see what we can do or not. Cryptography, I always think, is an extremely exciting area. And even with the need for, not need, the drive for machine learning and everybody wanting to do that, I think that security is still an issue, and maybe even more so, that there are going to be very interesting security questions that come up from these machine learning models, systems, and so on. So I think that there's always going to be a room for cryptography.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for taking your time today. I really
Thank you.
appreciate all your answers, and all the best for the future at
Thank you.
AWS. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a shame about your throat.